By the end of the week, the Ocean County prosecutor had promised that a grand jury would be looking into the matter, but he was firm on two things: that an unknown 14-year-old youth had accidentally set the fire, and that there had been no evidence of a chain-locked door. Some smelled a whitewash, others suspected a slap on the wrist only for Six Flags Great Adventure, if anything. Maps of the haunted castle began to surface. The inaccuracies or deliberate alterations were very obvious to me, just a seventh grader at the time. The Butcher and Phantom actor hiding spots were drawn with solid lines over them, as if they were solid walls. Incorrect, they were openings. No hatch door appeared behind Phantom, and there was no mention of the iron fence. The prosecutor's office had asked Six Flags Great Adventure for a map of the haunted castle, and this is what they had given them. It would seem that every attempt had been made to lowlight Phantom's accessibility to the emergency doors in the strobe hall and in the control room. Despite the inaccuracies, the map would remain the official diagram of the haunted castle for nearly 20 years. Perhaps the reasons for the lowlight are this. The NFPA report indicates the locations where the bodies were found, and estimates that most of the victims were at or near Phantom when they encountered the smoke and heat. I knew the haunted castle both before and after the fence. Had the fence not been there, the most obvious way to safety in that area would have been to jump through Phantom, but it was impossible the night of May 11th, 1984, because of that fence. To the press of Atlantic City, Mrs. Fields offered to take a lie detector test and said, "I'm praying to God that Great Adventure will come forward with the truth that there was a chain on that door." Great Adventure's spokesperson firmly denied this, and Ed Turnback, Ocean County prosecutor, said repeatedly that there had been no evidence of a chain-locked door. That summer, a grand jury would convene, and it would eventually return the following criminal indictments: manslaughter and aggravated manslaughter against both Six Flags and Great Adventure corporations, and manslaughter against David Pautzik and Larry Cochran, both general managers during the time of the haunted castle. Although it owned both Six Flags and Great Adventure corporations, Bally Manufacturing Incorporated was not named. Immediately, David Pautzik and Larry Cochran, the two men named in the indictment, applied to Ocean County's Pretrial Intervention Program, or PTI. If admitted into PTI, the men would have to perform some community service. Then charges would be dropped. The men were denied into the program twice, but Ed Turnback, Ocean County prosecutor, pushed for the executive's entrance into the PTI program. The parents of the dead were furious when they realized the men were let into the program, and now no one would ever face jail time because of the haunted castle. The trial against the corporations began on May 15, 1985 at the Ocean County Courthouse in downtown Toms River, 1 year, 4 days after the fatal fire. Suzette would be testifying the one-time parts, but not all of her story would be heard. She had been so shielded that it took the media 1 full year to report that there had been a sole survivor. History would prove that this trial would be the best possible thing that could ever happen to improve these companies' damaged images. The Six Flags and Great Adventure corporations paid $6 million, many times what it paid for the haunted castle itself, to counter the prosecution's main charge, that sprinklers that were many times suggested by experts for the haunted castle would have spared the 8 lives. Curiously testifying for the defense were Chet Shermer and Rolf Jensen, top officials from the NFPA, the National Fire Protection Association. The very agency that had documented the haunted castle and had written damning reports about its lack of safety. Shermer and Jensen had conducted a private study based on the size, conditions, and materials present at the haunted castle. They determined that a traditional sprinkler system would not have turned on in time to prevent the 8 deaths. The men's testimony horrified other members of the NFPA, which had bragged for years that no deaths had ever occurred in a sprinklered building. According to Shermer and Jensen, the haunted castle would have been the lone exception. Other members would eventually call for Shermer and Jensen's resignation from the NFPA. Although it never happened, future policy would be that members performing independent studies would have to clearly specify that their opinions were their own and did not reflect the National Fire Protection Association. Weeks were spent on boring testimony about the sprinkler systems. But never in the 6-week trial was there any mention of alleged chain doors. Mrs. Fields was not called, or did she appear on the list of over 600 witnesses. J.F. was on the list with his full name, but he was not called either. Also, there was no mention of the elusive phantom fence. Although it was displayed prominently in the Ocean County Sheriff's Department video that was played for the jurors without sound, peppered with screams from people on nearby freefall and lightning loops. Almost no one was surprised by the verdict, not guilty on all charges. From then on, the verdict was used as positive press for Six Flags Great Adventure. All future news articles relating to the Haunted Castle would be prefaced by it. The companies became disassociated with any guilt in relation to the Haunted Castle. 8 wrongful death suits were filed against Six Flags, Great Adventure, Bally, the Mahanas, and Jackson Township itself. Rather than another trial, all would quickly settle for about $600,000 to $750,000 each, ballooning to about $2.5 million over a 30-year payout.
Suzette got an undisclosed monetary amount for her injuries and trauma as well, but there would be no further trial as she had been promised that would reveal the inoperable exit, namely a chain locked door that she was told by her lawyer and her father had existed in the castle. Suzette firmly believed her father, whose information and word would be presumed to be above reproach, given his 2 high-profile jobs, deacon of the family church and agent for the Federal Bureau of Investigation in Washington, D.C.
Suzette distanced herself from the memory of the night at the Haunted Castle and would seldom speak about her experience to anyone until she met me. She would eventually tell me what happened in those final few minutes of horror in the Haunted Castle. Suzette and Nikki had been standing by the second panel of the revolving barrel display. Tina and Joey were standing by the first panel, and the boys were up ahead by the iron bars of Phantom. From Suzette's vantage point, she could see the turn past Phantom up ahead by Lady on the Wheel. Suddenly, Suzette and her friends noticed a large ball of black smoke rocketing down the hall, chasing them, just like the wall of smoke and ash had chased people down the New York City streets after the collapse of the World Trade Center. Suzette, Tina, and their new friends linked arms, crouched low, and began to retreat towards the main entrance. Behind them, the 5 boys were in a full-blown panic, screaming in Spanish, standing up in the fumes, becoming disoriented, banging into walls, and ultimately trampling the other 4 at the end of the hallway near the air conditioning vent. Suzette was separated from Tina and was not entangled like the others. The trampling had been so violent that Suzette was sure that those left behind must be seriously injured. This hallway began to fill with smoke as well, and Suzette continued to crawl toward the main exit. Unknown to her, Joey Beirudi had also managed to escape the main death trailer, and had crawled almost as far as she had. She pulled Nikki's bandana that was still around her neck over her face, and crawled so hard and so fast that her hands were filled with splinters, and all her long fingernails broke. Suzette was sure she was going to die here. All her life she'd been warned by the preacher that she'd never know when her last day was going to be. She had no fear. Her faith promised her that because she believed in Jesus Christ, she was going to go on to a better life. A sudden peacefulness came over her as all hell was breaking loose around her. She prayed for a miracle and got one. She was picked up